Good morning, everyone. I'm Barbara Vanich, Chief Auditor and Director of Professional Standards at the PCAOB, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. I'd like to welcome our members, observers, board members, and members of the public joining us for today's meeting of the Standards and Emerging Issues Advisory Group of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. We have a full agenda today, including 2 technology-related topics, artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency. While these topics were also discussed at the May SEAG meeting, the technology landscape is rapidly changing, and today we'd like to explore whether or not the views and insights you previously shared with us on these important topics have changed as a result of that changing landscape. First, Acting Chair Bodick and board members Ho, Stein, and Thompson will make a few remarks. Following this, I'll provide a brief standard-setting update and an update on the Investor Advisory Group's Critical Audit Matter Awards. If members don't mind, I'd like to ask you to hold any questions or remarks until after my update. And as a reminder, if you would like to say something during today's meeting, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. And now my final responsibility here, although others may repeat it, is to state that for all representatives of the PCAOB speaking at the meeting today, the remarks by PCAOB speakers are provided in our official capacity, and the views expressed are those of the speaker, and the views do not necessarily reflect views of the board members, or other members of the staff. And with that said, I'll turn the floor over to Acting Chair Bodick.
Great. Well, good morning, and thank you, Barb, for starting us off this morning. It's a privilege to be with you today at our fall SEAG meeting. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation for your willingness to share your insights and expertise that will ultimately advance the PCAOB's mission of investor protection. We recognize that everyone is incredibly busy, and yet you freely volunteer your time to be part of this important work that the SEAG does. That generosity of spirit is not lost on us. So it is our responsibility and our commitment to ensure your time is put to good use and that your contributions are considered and ultimately help shape our priorities and inform our oversight. Simply put, your advice is not just appreciated, it's essential. Now, before I continue, let me quickly give my disclaimer that my remarks this morning are my own in my official capacity as an individual PCAOB board member and do not necessarily reflect the views of the full board, my fellow board members, or the PCAOB's dedicated staff. We're in a period of rapid change, and our shared commitments to investor protection and audit quality has never been more important. In 2009, a meeting of the Standing Advisory Group, or SAG, the precursor to today's SEAG, former PCAOB Acting Chairman Dan Gelzer said that the individuals advising the PCAOB on standards are, and I quote, one of the key vehicles the board uses to gain input and insight into how it should be directing its activities in setting public company auditing standards, close quote. This sentiment remains true. The current SEAG continues to be one of the most important vehicles shaping our work, not just in standard setting, but across our oversight activities. What makes this group so valuable is the breadth and depth of perspective each of you brings to this table. This is a diverse forum for the exchange of ideas, feedback, and insight. SEAG meetings provide us with the opportunity to pause, reflect, and consider whether we are asking the right questions. Are we focused on the right risks? Are we doing enough to prepare for what comes next? And is what we are doing working as intended? And if not, why not? At the PCAOB, effective oversight is built not just on inspections and standards, but on dialogue and engagement. That is why I believe the PCAOB is a marketplace of ideas, a space where investors, auditors, audit committee members, preparers, and the academic community, all represented here on the SEAG, can engage openly on the expectations of investors as well as the challenges and opportunities facing auditors, preparers of financial statements. Our work should reflect broad perspectives across the financial reporting environment and implications for the audit, so we are operating with the knowledge to help us see the road ahead. Now, with that in mind, I want to focus my remarks on 2 areas. First, artificial intelligence, and second, crypto. Antoine Cornick, an economist at the University of Virginia, recently gave an interview about the pace of technology in which he said, and I quote, "The internet was a minor breeze compared to the huge storm that will hit us. If this technology develops at the pace leaders are predicting, we are utterly unprepared." Close quote. For example, ChatGPT reached 1 million users within 5 days of its launch. By comparison, it took Facebook 10 months and Twitter 2 years to reach 1 million users. The rapid adoption of AI is astonishing, and we are seeing a familiar story playing out with the pace of AI use in financial reporting. In the last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that companies are relying on generative AI to help draft their financial statements, not only writing the management's discussion analysis, but gathering information for journal entries. What is more, it has been reported that certain companies are planning to use AI to produce the first draft of their financial statements as early as next year. While these advancements will likely improve productivity and reduce, if not eliminate, human error, for auditors in particular, there are questions about how to ensure there is still a human in the loop, or possibly more appropriately, a human in the lead. Given the significance of AI's potential opportunities and challenges, the PCAOB cannot afford to take a wait-and-see approach. Our response must be principled, adaptive, and deliberate. In professional services like auditing, where critical thinking and professional skepticism are non-negotiable, the adoption of AI demands a heightened understanding of its impact and consequences from all of us. Now, this should be of no surprise to anyone, especially auditors, but AI is already being used to facilitate fraud. New image generation AI models have sparked an increase in AI-generated receipts. In fact, one software provider said fake AI receipts were up 14% in September compared to 0 last year. The advent of free and accessible image generation software has made it easy for employees to quickly falsify receipts in seconds by writing simple text instructions to chatbots. A senior vice president at SAP Concur is quoted as saying, "These receipts are so good, we tell our customers, do not trust your eyes." Now, at the same time, AI may be used to facilitate fraud. A significant challenge posed by AI is its potential to erode the auditor's ability to exercise critical thinking and professional skepticism. Researchers have already found that university students who use large language models, or LLMs, to complete writing and research tasks experience reduced cognitive efforts, but demonstrated poorer reasoning and argumentation skills compared to those students using traditional search methods. This finding offers a cautionary insight because while AI can relieve human auditors of administrative tasks, it may also compromise reasoning and judgment. As AI tools begin to influence judgment traditionally made by humans, auditors must grapple with how to uphold the principles that are critical to the financial statement auditor: due professional care, professional skepticism, independence, and accountability. Stefan Puttoni, the faculty co-director of Wharton Human AI Research, has said that when it comes to AI, and I quote, "The challenge isn't replacement, it's readiness. Companies that invest in training, culture, and guardrails will be the ones that turn everyday AI into long-term advantage." This shift challenged us to think deeply, not just about what we do, but how we do it. That is why I'm especially glad we are discussing this topic today. The PCAOB continues to uphold its place as a marketplace of ideas, where all participants in the financial reporting ecosystem can engage openly in the future of the audit. It is through this kind of dialogue that we ensure the PCAOB is best positioned to proactively respond and ensure innovation is matched by integrity. So I look forward to this part of our meeting, and am particularly interested in hearing views by all members about the impact of the use of AI on audit evidence, and whether audit committee members have thoughts or views regarding the auditor's use of AI. The second area I will be addressing today is cryptocurrency. As more public companies embrace crypto, it presents novel challenges to traditional audit procedures, such as, for example, ownership and valuation. Crypto is a focus in the PCAOB's inspection program. In fact, we have issued 2 spotlight documents focused on crypto assets, where we share observations from our inspections that highlight both good practices and areas where improvement is needed. These insights are part of our broader effort to bring transparency to how firms are approaching this evolving asset class. We are not alone in this work. The AICPA has issued an audit practice aid, and other regulators are also exploring how to address crypto in their frameworks. It is clear there's a growing and necessary interest across the audit ecosystem for more information on crypto, and that is why it is so important that we're discussing it today. We welcome feedback about what you're seeing and what guidance, if any, may be needed. Additionally, I'm curious to hear thoughts as to whether there are notable diversity in practice when comparing procedures that auditors are currently performing around cryptocurrency, and what challenges are driving such diversity. Now, I want to close with a reflection on the PCAOB's strength, that the PCAOB's strength lies not just in its statutory authority, but in its willingness to engage in the marketplace of ideas with all participants in the financial reporting ecosystem. Going back to Professor Kornick's warning about the rapidly evolving pace of technology and the risk of not being prepared, I believe the SEAG's work, your work, is helping to ensure the PCAOB is prepared for the opportunities and challenges that AI and crypto present. Our North Star remains investor protection. Innovation must never outpace accountability. I want to again thank all members of the SEAG for your partnership, your insights, and your commitment to the work of the PCAOB and the public interest. And I look forward very much to today's dialogue. Now, with that, I will turn it over to my fellow board members to see if they would like to say a few words. And as Barb said, we'll go back to Barb and then open up for questions and comments. Thank you very much. Board Member Ho.
Thank you, Acting Chair Bode. Good morning. The views I express today are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the PCAOB, other board members, or staff. I want to thank SEAG members for your continued engagement and expertise. Today, I will focus my remarks on innovation through the responsible use of AI in public company auditing. The question is not whether AI will transform auditing. It already is. The real question is whether the PCAOB will lead that transformation or continue to lag behind it. For example, audit firms are deploying AI tools to assess complete populations of journal entries and analyze data at unprecedented scale. These innovations promise significant improvements in audit quality. But regulatory ambiguity threatens to stifle and impede this progress. If our standards create uncertainty about AI-driven procedures, firms may retreat to less effective manual methods simply because they are more familiar from a compliance standpoint. That would certainly be a regulatory failure. The Technology Innovation Alliance Working Group's future state deliverable provides a roadmap with 4 pillars: promoting structured data, providing AI guidance, building innovation capacity, and encouraging technology literacy. But recommendations only matter if we act on them timely. I want to highlight 3 essential areas for PCAOB action. First, provide regulatory clarity. Audit firms need clear, principle-based guidance on responsible AI use, including frameworks for model validation, documentation, and quality control. Clarity incentivizes innovation. Ambiguity creates compliance risks that discourages it. Second, explore agile standard setting for technology-driven standards. Technology innovation moves faster than our traditional process. We need iterative approaches with stakeholder testing and input before formal adoption. An innovation lab could facilitate experimentation and develop standards that promote rather than impede audit quality. Third, align our inspection methodology with innovation objectives that are directly linked to audit quality. Our inspectors need training and clear criteria to evaluate AI-driven procedures fairly, recognizing when technology enhances audit quality rather than treating it as check-the-box compliance risk. The alternative is stale regulation, where our standards become anchors rather than engines for audit quality. We cannot afford this when investors depend on high-quality audits that increasingly depend on responsible technology adoption. Responsible AI use requires thoughtful governance around accuracy, bias, documentation, and explainability. But addressing these concerns doesn't require regulatory barriers that prevent beneficial innovation. Proportionate risk-based regulation can protect audit quality while enabling technological progress. These same principles, stakeholder engagement, agile standard setting, and innovation-focused regulation, apply to other emerging areas, including crypto. As more public companies hold digital assets and consider engaging in various types of crypto activities, we face similar questions about audit procedures and regulatory clarity. Whether discussing AI or crypto, the principle is the same. The PCAOB must provide clarity to ensure audit quality keeps pace with financial innovation. We're not operating in a vacuum. The SEC's crypto task force, led by Commissioner Peirce, has held extensive roundtables demonstrating transparent stakeholder engagement. The CFTC launched its crypto sprint with joint SEC harmonization initiatives. FASB issued comprehensive crypto accounting standards, providing needed clarity. These entities recognize that regulatory ambiguity stifles innovation, and enforcement-first approaches drive activity offshore. They responded with clarity and collaboration. When major regulators actively promote innovation through clear guidance, the PCAOB cannot afford to be the outlier that inadvertently discourages beneficial technological advancement in auditing. The auditing profession is rising to meet the AI challenge. We must rise with them while maintaining rigorous investor protection standards. I look forward to your perspectives on promoting responsible innovation in public auditing. Thank you. Now to you, Board Member Stein.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here virtually. Thanks for your pro bono commitment to this standards and emerging issues group. I think the topics that you're discussing today couldn't be timelier. And I was, thinking with these topics, you're really putting the E and the I into the SEAG today. So I thought I'd like to put a couple questions on the table that I hope the group can help us think about today. Let's start with AI. AI offers tremendous potential to streamline audit procedures and make the audit process more efficient, but it also entails risks. Acting Chair Bodick pointed out some of the Wall Street Journal coverage on this recently. There was also a New York Times DealBook article from a few weeks ago that highlighted how AI can now produce thousands, if not millions of documents almost instantaneously. So the question is, how should auditors approach the risks and the opportunities in the use of AI by preparers and by auditors? How can we support the improvement of audit quality more broadly in areas with higher technological complexity? And then turning to digital assets, with the passage of the Genius Act this past year, this has also been an area of rapid change. And as this industry grows and it matures, especially as digital assets increasingly interact with the balance sheets of public companies, it's important we think together about how the audit sector interacts with it. So first is a question of audit standards. How are auditors doing with the standards that are in place today? What are the pressure points and what is the right balance between standards and guidance for this rapidly evolving sector? For example, are we providing sufficient clarity around expectations for the sufficiency of audit evidence regarding the existence and control of the digital asset, including pertaining to digital keys? And if we're not, what are the pros and cons of the possible approaches? Second, what are the unique features of this asset class that need to be considered from an audit perspective? For example, how do smart contracts and other automated protocols, when they're utilized, interact with audit expectations? What about decentralization? Third, valuation and estimates are always important to think about, as they are challenging for a variety of sectors. But how are different digital asset markets developing approaches to valuation? And are insights that are available from other markets and asset classes that exhibit differing amounts of liquidity helpful? Insights from maybe commodities markets, derivatives markets. Of course, I look forward to also hearing the questions that you will be asking today. So thank you again for your time, and I look forward to engaging with you and everyone interested in supporting the evolution of the audit in these two important areas in our financial markets. Thank you.
All right, I think it's time for me to share a few of my thoughts. Thank you, Board Member Stein. I would like to echo my fellow board members. Welcome to all of SEAG members and others watching today's meeting. Our PCAOB staff have put forth an agenda with topics of critical relevance for the profession. Rapid acceleration of technology has been a topic for decades, but ever more so over the last 3 years. With continued expansion of technology and auditing, there are both opportunities and challenges. When I joined the PCAOB board in January 2022, it was before the explosion of ChatGPT and other significant AI technology. And I can distinctly remember that there are only a small number of public issuers with material crypto balances. And as Kara mentioned, with the passing of the Genius Act, there is an expansion of growth in the digital asset space. Given the pace of change in these two areas, I'm eager to gain a greater understanding of the opportunities and challenges about which we, as the audit regulator, should be attuned. In particular, I hope to hear from today's participants specific examples of how AI and crypto are evolving and impacting the audit profession. And I hope to hear your views on how our standards may need to also evolve in consideration of these changes to advance audit quality. My sincere thanks to the members of the SEAG, again, for volunteering your time to share important insights with the board on these topics. And finally, I would like to thank Barb Vantage and her team for organizing today's meeting. And more broadly, I would like to thank all the staff involved for their continued dedication to the investor protection mission of the PCAOB. And also thank Acting Chair Bodick.
Thank you, board members. So since this group last met, there have been two developments that I'd like to mention. The first is the delay of the effective date of QC 1000, the board's new standard on quality control, for 1 year from December 15th, 2025 to December. This delay was important to audit quality and investor protection, as it will allow sorry, I'm getting an error message with Zoom, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. As it will allow for a thoughtful and robust implementation of the standard. During this time, the staff continued to engage, monitor implementation efforts of firms. The second issue that I want to mention is the issuance of a board policy statement related to new paragraph
Barb, I don't think we can hear you.
Back in on mute. My Zoom restarted. Thank you, Board Member Ho. Okay, so I'm not sure where you stopped hearing me, so let me back up a second. So the second topic I wanted to mention is the issuance of a board policy statement related to new paragraph 10A of AS 1105 that relates to information obtained from the company in electronic form and some related examples published by the staff. The board statement applies in specific circumstances where the auditor is responding to a low risk of material misstatement and can conclude that based on their understanding of the process, that there's not more than a remote possibility that information has been modified to the extent it would be rendered unreliable. I'd like to turn next and just have a few brief remarks on the Investor Advisory Group's recently conducted second annual Critical Audit Matter Awards. The awards solicit public input on examples of critical or key audit matters that are believed to provide decision-useful information to investors. The objective of this annual initiative is to encourage auditors to continually improve the quality of information communicated to investors in the audit opinions of public companies. As discussed at their September 2025 meeting, the IAG received nominations of 20 key or critical audit matters from 2024 annual reports of SEC registrants. 11 of those were for critical audit matters and 9 were for key audit matters. All nominated key audit matters were from the audit reports of UK companies that are 20F filers. The 2024 nominations were submitted by 7 individuals from the audit reports of 11 different SEC registrants. All 20 nominations came from the audit reports of the 4 largest accounting firms. IAG members identified 3 CAMs among the nominations that they thought were particularly insightful or useful to investors. A critical audit matter in the audit report of Boeing entitled Cost Estimates for Fixed Price Development Contracts received first place. Second place was a key audit matter in the audit report of Rolls-Royce Holdings PLC entitled Long-Term Contract Accounting and Associated Provisions. And third place went to another key audit matter in the audit report of Compass Group PLC entitled Uncertain Direct Tax Provisions. The IAG anticipates issuing a public report, what will describe in more detail the nominations received, the nominators' reasoning for their submissions, the IAG's reasonings for selecting the top 3, and how each of the matters could be further improved. And I would like to thank the IAG, and in particular, IAG and SEAG member Jeff Mahoney for all the work that goes into those awards. I'll now go ahead and open the floor for any questions or comments that SEAG members may want to raise at this point in time. And again, if you weren't watching the chat, to raise your hand, click on the heart, not the arrow by the heart, and you will see the raise your hand function. Brian Croto?
Yeah, thanks, Barb, and thanks to all of the board members for the really thoughtful opening statements. I think this is going to be an exciting dialogue we'll have here on what are very important topics today, particularly on AI and Acting Chair Bodick, certainly some of the comments you've made about the human in the lead, professional skepticism, the importance of reasoning and judgment. I mean, those are topics I know we'll spend a lot of time talking about. It's a fast-moving area, and I'm excited to have this dialogue today. And each of the board members, in terms of some of the tee-up, I think have touched on some really important aspects of what we'll, I know, undoubtedly spend some time on. Barb, I just wanted to comment on 10 Cap A. Really appreciate the dialogue that we've been able to have, and ultimately as a profession, and ultimately the guidance that was issued in the board statement that was issued. I do think that will, from our perspective, enable us to move ahead relative to the implementation with clarity as to what the expectations are there. And then on QC 1000, I know we, CAQ, and some other firms have submitted comment letters related to the extension, and certainly appreciate the incremental time relative to adoption. I know there were some issues that we've each raised in comment letters that, again, I think are fairly discrete, where we thought some further consideration based on implementation challenges to date could get some further consideration. And I do think all that could be done in a way that wouldn't have to defer further the effective date for the most part, or maybe even at all, while still being able to give some consideration to some of those issues more discreetly. Maybe some of those areas that were most problematic, you could imagine some degree of deferral while there's incremental consideration, but that wouldn't stop presumably the standard from otherwise moving ahead, which I think would be important to get that adopted and moved ahead. But mostly just wanted to express the appreciation for the dialogue with the profession and then the progress that we were able to make relative to 10 Cap A. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I don't see any other hands up, but I'm assuming that's because everyone's excited to get to the topics on the agenda. Okay. Well, with that, Danny is going to provide a brief update before we jump into our discussion on AI. She'll give us just a few reminders of our discussion back in May, and also cover some important developments like Board Member Ho touched on the issuance of the TIA report. So Danny, I put it in your good hands.
Thank you very much, Barb. So as Barb just stated, the next item on our agenda is artificial intelligence. Again, as Barb stated in her opening remarks, artificial intelligence was most recently discussed as part of one of 3 breakout sessions held during the May 2025 SEAG meeting. So the report back of that breakout session highlighted the following when it comes to preparers' use of AI. So the use of AI is increasing. This includes using AI for things like drafting footnotes, drafting accounting memos, preparing journal entries, and in some circumstances, assisting management with making estimates. So things are evolving, but there is still, as discussed at the time of the May meeting, a human element in the process. Most members indicated that they haven't seen agentic AI being used, but that it is something that is being widely explored. When it comes to risks, the breakout room acknowledged that there are risks, including tools not doing what they're intended to do. This again highlighted the importance of human involvement and fully understanding what tools are doing. From an investor perspective, concerns were raised that AI will produce boilerplate disclosures. However, counter arguments were presented indicating that AI could highlight missing disclosures. The discussion highlighted that some guidance about AI's impact on the auditor's risk assessment could be helpful. It was noted that it is important for auditors to understand issuer governance in the AI space and ensure that appropriate controls are in place. Further, it was noted that many auditors are asking for management representations in this area. So with regards to auditors' use of AI, the report back of the May breakout session highlighted the following. AI is being used in a variety of tasks, including risk assessment documentation, summarization of procedures performed, detecting anomalies, and contract analysis. Here, again, it was highlighted that the important thing is understanding the tools being used and their limitations, and providing the right guidance and instruction for teams using the tools to ensure that there is not over-reliance. Similar to preparers' use of AI, it was noted that human involvement is critical and that a firm's quality controls should evolve to address the use of AI tools. There was a suggestion that the PCAOB could build upon our 2024 Spotlight, which summarized outreach to audit firms and companies regarding their perspective on the integration of Gen AI in audits and financial reporting. In particular, while members generally thought standards were adequate in this area, it was suggested that a future Spotlight could include a discussion of the importance of the following topics as they relate to AI: professional skepticism, supervision and review, audit procedures related to relevance and reliability of audit evidence, and communication with management and audit committees. So subsequent to the May SEAG, on September 3rd, 2025, the PCAOB publicly posted a report dated May 2024 entitled Transforming Audit Quality Through Technology, which was prepared by the Technology Innovation Alliance, or TIA working group, which is of course led by Board Member Ho. As part of the report, and as acknowledged by Board Member Ho in her opening remarks, the TIA made recommendations categorized under 4 different pillars. One pillar, using AI in auditing, included a recommendation that the PCAOB focus on learning more about how AI functions and can function in auditing, and developing risk management guidance containing principles and frameworks to help audit firms evaluate and govern the responsible use of AI in auditing. The recommendation indicated that such initiatives could ultimately facilitate the increased use of technology in auditing as a whole, with the potential to improve audit quality as a result. Furthermore, it was noted that the initiatives could provide clarity to audit firms and audit methodology providers with regard to good practices regarding audit firms' use of technology in conducting the audit. So we wanted to provide that brief overview to refresh everyone's memory of the previous SEAG conversation on AI, but also highlight certain recommendations, again, that were made by the TIA working group. So we'd now like to move into our discussion of AI as part of today's meeting and build upon that previous May discussion. So in advance of today's meeting, we shared a series of questions with you for your consideration. And Awilda, thank you very much. The first 2 questions now appear on screen. We posed these questions in particular with the goal of obtaining an update on the current and future use of AI by auditors and preparers. So with that said, I will go ahead and open the floor for a discussion of these 2 questions, which again are largely on the current and future state of the use of AI by auditors and preparers. And again, to contribute, if you click on the heart react button at the bottom, you will see an option to raise your hand, and we will call on members as we see hands raised. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, I was gonna let someone else go first this time, but maybe from an issuer perspective, and I know others will probably chime in here, but in terms of what we're seeing, and it probably won't surprise you across our issuer base, it's really consistent with the remarks that have been made kind of by board members so far and your own remarks. Certainly there are traditional forms of AI, so whether that be OCR or machine learning that we've long seen, you know, compared to Gen AI, we've long seen begin to be more deeply embedded in financial reporting and controls. We're now beginning to see we're at the point of Gen AI being closer to being embedded from an ICFR perspective. Although I think what I've heard so far this morning is consistent with our own experience, that at the moment we're not seeing reliance generally on Gen AI relative to financial reporting and controls. There certainly are accelerators being used in the process by management, and there are certainly lots of use cases as we look across, and this is where certainly the benefit of a multidisciplinary firm comes to play. We've certainly been looking across and having discussion with our colleagues that are working with our non-audit clients from a consulting perspective, and in that space, considering the things that are in development from a management perspective for ICFR, or more broadly from a financial reporting perspective, because we know as we see that stuff implemented at our non-audit clients, we can expect that to be the case for our audit clients as well. And I think some of the examples that were provided are definitely the kinds of things we're beginning to hear about. And incrementally, it's not just in terms of the company's processes. You think about even within SAP or Oracle, there's now Gen AI embedded within the ability for companies to be using tools that are within those software tools today. So we're beginning to see that move more rapidly across our client base. But at this point, from an ICFR perspective, again, mostly more as an accelerator, with the human taking kind of full responsibility and having the involvement such that there's not reliance today. But we are getting much closer and the speed is faster. It's very similar relative to what I would say from an auditor perspective at the moment. Certainly, the traditional AI is not new. We've been doing that for quite some time with the right controls and the right environment, the right monitoring over it. From a generative AI perspective, we've got business rules and policies that we believe are clear, intuitive, and easy to remember for our people to make sure that the human, maybe to use George's words, are in the lead, and that we're performing the right review of the information that's being input or utilized relative to the tools that we're using, as well as then any output from those tools through appropriate review. So we are moving quickly. I mean, the use cases at this point are developing more rapidly. We've put tools in the hands of our people, and again, with the right kind of monitoring over that over time. So I think well summarized at the beginning of the discussion. I know we'll get on into this later in the discussion today, but I think what's really critical here is thinking about whether the company or a firm, the overall control environment, the tone at the top, and then ultimately the controls and monitoring that are put in place relative to the appropriate use of Gen AI to be sure that you're appropriately addressing risk while also maximizing and taking appropriate opportunities and benefits in achieving that at the same time. So maybe I'll stop there, but I think very consistent with some of the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Brian. And Stephen Rivera, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Now, I just want to maybe share my thoughts, at least from a preparer perspective. I guess what we see AI impacting preparers and how things are kind of moving forward. I kind of maybe I would just kind of maybe overall saying that preparers are not moving very quickly. I would say they kind of it's kind of a wait and see, and let me kind of bucket it in a couple of ways. I've seen it first with automation. A lot of companies, especially big companies, they don't have the ability to get data that's very clean. So it takes a long time to get data sanitized in the way that they can actually use it. So that's going to be a big stumbling block for big companies, from preparers, trying to get data that's clean and useful. And this is where we can talk from an audit standpoint. Brian could talk about that. But that's probably the biggest issue, why auditors have a difficult time, especially for a global company, trying to get data and systems that don't talk to each other. And so companies, lots of big companies, are in the process of doing transformation because to get that data sanitized. The other thing is a lot of data is also in silos. So it's not all connected. So you're not going to get the right answer all the time because it is not all connected in the right spot. So what I've seen happening with preparers is maybe the first layer is predictive, I would say kind of, I would like predictive analytics kind of, because that's where I see a lot of that happening. They have built systems in a way in order to kind of turn things around rather quickly. 10 years ago, we had people working 20 hours at night, 20 of the day trying to figure out what to do next, right? Now you can have a tool that can actually turn things around and come up with different scenarios for you in a much rapid fashion. So that's where I think you're seeing a lot of, I would say, good benefit from preparer perspective. The other thing is automation. So I kind of look at automation. Is automation and AI the same thing? I don't know. Automation is sometimes just a way to get AI to feed into each other. Because I'm not an AI person, but the ability to have automation is critical. And if you don't have that, then they can't get the data and use it quickly. But what preparers want to get to is, I would say, real monitoring. They want almost like some way to connect to leaders very quickly when bad things happen. How does that happen in a quick and a fashion way? If something happens around the world, how does that CEO know what to do? The CFO, does he know what to do? Does he talk to the audit committee rapidly? So this ability to have quick information quickly and react quickly, real-time monitoring, this is where I think it's very important for a preparer to have that information readily available. And I think this is where AI could really be a great tool, because if you don't know what's going on, and it's not coming to your company in a rapid fashion, you could actually miss something pretty quickly. And all of a sudden, guess what? Your stock goes down because you aren't aware of what's going on. So this is where, again, preparers are moving slowly because I think the first step for them, data needs to be clean. The data has to be clean, and if it's not clean, you're not going to get the right answer. So that's why they're moving slowly on this. And again, I would say there's pockets of it. R&D, I would say in operations, from a preparer perspective, it's excelling very quickly, but it's very different. That's very different from financial reporting, where R&D and life sciences, big time. I've seen a lot of changes in R&D where AI has a great role and doing some great things. But financial reporting I would say from the C-suite, moving slowly, and they want to kind of walk before they run on this one. So that's just my views and what I'm seeing so far. I've talked with other preparers.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Stephen. And I see Colleen Honigsberg, your hand raised, so go ahead.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So this is, anecdotal, but I did a site visit to a large tech company about a week ago, and I was really, really struck by the way that they're using AI in internal audit and compliance and risk assessment. So if you think of stage one as me using ChatGPT to help sort of craft some research or an email. So that would be step one or stage one. Stage two, we can think of it as me using an AI agent to manage my calendar or do some other task for me. Then if we think of stage three as I have an AI agent that is supervising other AI agents and running processes on its own. So they were on step three, which I did not realize we had a lot of companies that were on step three. And I don't think we do because of Stephen's point about the data. And so when we were speaking with them, they said they had a lot of other companies that were interested in trying to buy their services, but that those other companies simply didn't have the data infrastructure to be able to implement what they're doing right now. With that said, I really took away from the conversation that this is a company that is struggling with governance and struggling to define internal controls when they're using agents to supervise other agents. And they would very, very much welcome input from the PCAOB or anybody else who is interested in this. You can think of if you have an agent supervising other agents, designing internal controls for that is just a nightmare and incredibly difficult. And you can maybe look at the output, but it's really, really tough, if not impossible, to look at the input that is actually being provided. So I'm very grateful that PCAOB is having this today. And if anyone here would be interested in speaking with the company, I know they're really looking for leadership and governance in this area.
Thank you, Colleen. That's really insightful. I appreciate those remarks. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Bob Hirth now.
Great. Thank you, Danny. And to give you a little perspective, at Protiviti, we operate, I'll say, the intersection of issuers and the audit firms. We're not a assurance provider. We spend most of our time around the ICFR space, helping companies develop and design their internal controls, doing the testing. And in many cases, the testing that we do is relied on to some degree by the audit firms. So I think we have an interest in both sides of the equation. One of the questions was, what are the specific tools that issuers are considering? Let me give you some examples of that. Obviously, you've talked about Copilot. We use that extensively with respect to summarizing information, doing research, creating notes from meetings, etc. One of the tools that we use quite a bit is called Data Snipper. We're finding that it's reducing time to test manual controls by about 30%. Data Snipper now is coming up with an upgrade that they call DocuMine. The estimate there is that manual testing is going to be decreased by about 80%. So those are a couple of specific tools. Also, their tools, Audit Board and Field Guide, are two tools, and they're working to put some IA into both of those tools, and then maybe to Colleen's perspective, that will improve a lot of the work that internal audit does. At Protiviti itself, we have our own tool called a SOC report extractor. So we can take a risk and control matrix and a SOC report and use this AI tool to automatically populate a particular SOX analysis template that we have. I've also run across a new revenue recognition and revenue management tool called Zenskar. It's spelled ZenSkar. It's probably best used for other software companies, but what it does is it uses AI to extract data from contracts, populate that into the RevRec tool that's been set up with all the different parameters given the contract. So that's been a really interesting tool as well. We also have our own proprietary large language model. We call it Protiviti Atlas. And just to give you example, we had an engagement just recently where we analyzed 13,000 risks and controls and looked at them against some criteria, which was the particular company's internal control standards. We were able to do that analysis in less than 30 seconds per control. So it was only 100 something hours to do 13,000 controls. So those are some specific examples where we're using tools, and I know we're considering more. And I think the big thing we're doing is probably continuing to develop our own AI tools, primarily around the just having competitive advantage. So obviously we'd like to say we have this and someone doesn't, but I think the work that we do again is for the issuer company with respect to ICFR. And again, the fact we've used those tools, and as we work with the audit firms, clearly there's going to be some questioning about that, but ultimately we would expect some reliance on the work we do. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bob. And those are really insightful examples. Just as a quick follow-up question, correct me if I'm wrong, it does sound like the examples you shared are all instances where there is a human that continues to be in the loop from a supervisory perspective.
Yeah, and I did some polling of people in the firm, and in a number of questions they had, there's a QA phase to all that work when it comes out, for us to be sure that it's doing the right thing. So yeah, I would say yes, there's a human interaction component, but there's a whole lot of crunching that's done by the applications or the tools.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you.
One thing I'd add, well, I guess what we're seeing at the end of the day, to Stephen's point, I mean, we are seeing a big to huge reduction in the manual hours that previously existed. Now, for all of the firms, and maybe it's not the PCAOB's interest, but how do you price for that? I was with a CFO the other day that said, well, show me how much it's going to decrease my fees by doing this. I think there's some interesting, I believe there's some guidance that should be provided. The PCAOB can do a great job of that, where there should be a standard around auditing AI, like there is a standard for, auditing receivables. I think there's a point for that. So I think, we see a lot of opportunity, and, we're just, as George mentioned today, we're just not going to stop.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you very much for those contributions. Dane, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, so obviously not a prepared investor, but we've been doing a lot of work with AI, so I can kind of give some viewpoints from that perspective. I think first part of it is that I think companies would be at different places in their journey, their AI journey. Companies that are principally or mostly in the cloud today have a lot more ability to kind of harness all these powers, and a lot of companies are still on-prem and are in this migration process, and it's going to be slower adoption for them. And then as you bring on new systems and integrate systems and structure your data and all these other things, that's really where the power of the technology starts to unlock. I've done a lot of experimenting with AI projects, and I had an associate, for example, manually go through 150 companies and pull out some specific analysis from proxy statements over the course of 4 months and write up like 4-page summaries for some information that is useful to us as investors. And we use that as some A/B testing, because first we had a human do an exercise and do it repetitively over a large sample of companies. And then what we've done is we've done prompt engineering and tried to build the prompt to try to extract the same things from the same documents that we'd want to, giving them training on a small subset of those companies, so to learn what a human does. And then we've continuously compared what the AI is capable of versus what they're outputting as models kind of upgrade. And that's happening every few months. So like, oh, there's a new model out, and you can actually see an uptick in quality. And but my point here is I think that people should be careful, regardless of what their job function is, about just kind of willfully handing something over. There should be this testing aspect of kind of making that determination when you're comfortable to hand a specific task over to AI. And I think like there's need for maybe a principles-based approach to things here. It's like, yeah, you start with an audit paper, and maybe, you know, if you're the auditor, you split up the audit into all the mundane tasks that it is, and then you make a decision about which tasks are more mundane, commodity-based, low risk, and maybe those that are ones where you're more, you know, open to employing AI. And I think there should be this flow chart where folks are saying, like, here's the task. We've had a AI risk assessment. It's low, medium, high. Here's the function that we're letting the AI do. And at this point, versus what a human would do, we're fairly comfortable with what it's outputting or not, or it's 50% of the way there or 75% of the way there, and this is the model. And then reassess, you know, like at some point, you know, because some tasks you're okay with a higher probability of risk of not getting it absolute certain. But then there are other higher risk tasks for a function, you know, whether it be an auditor, like making the ultimate audit decision, humans should be in control there. Investors, we're not anywhere near to at the point where we're letting AI trade for us. Like, you know, that's a higher risk function. So it's kind of like separating all your tasks into the high and low risk functions, and then having it all documented. And I think that's what's going to help the profession, because for the PCAOB as well, because when you can look at these documents, see the diversity of practice, it is a little bit of the wild west. You're going to have a lot of divergence in terms of what specific companies are doing, what other companies are doing. And then, you know, from that collection of data at an audit firm level, at a audit oversight level, you'll kind of get a better sense of how this is all evolving, and it's all happening fast. So it's not prescriptive, it's more principles based, and like, here's the framework and here's the assessment. So that's my broad view.
Great. Thank you very much, Dane. Appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over to Preeti Chowdhury.
Thank you, Danny. Can you guys hear me okay?
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So in preparation for this, I was looking at some use cases, and I think that what would be super helpful if the PCAOB were to consider a risk model for AI in terms of, and that risk model probably varies based on the life cycle of where a company is in using it, kind of relating back to what Colleen was saying. I think that kind of risk framework would be really helpful to develop. And then once you have that risk framework, then we could move into talking about the different kinds of preventative and detective controls that can be used and how they could be used to address different types of risk. And some of this, I think you can already start with what we have in, you know, AS5 and ICFR, but it's not identical. And there's a lot of different kinds of risks and different kinds of controls that are needed. But this kind of framework would be super helpful to get the ball rolling and to get people to start thinking about it in a principled and organized fashion to ensure that they have an effective process in place. I think it would really promote, back to Christina, Board Member Ho's comments, it would really promote acceleration and advancement in technology if such a framework could be driven by the PCAOB. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those suggestions, Preeti. I'm going to hand it over to Jamila Mayfield now. Oh, and Jamila, you're still on mute right now. Great.
Okay, no excuse for that because it's not Monday, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really quickly, I am working at Comply. I'm the Chief Regulatory Services Officer now, former EY partner. All the CPA stuff is really in my blood, but at Comply, kind of like Bob and Dane and their comments, we help issuers and non-issuers, obviously just, asset managers, broker dealers, with their financial statements. So we'll do everything from 13F, NPX, but we also feed information to internal audit and to the auditors if they need it, based on code of ethics, personal trading monitoring, all those things that you would need from a financial services perspective. We do that for IAs and BDs. And I just think overall, the financial services industry being less tangible than some of the other industries really need this guidance. They're moving very fast on doing things. Dane, you mentioned we're not trying to go trade fully AI right now, but there are a lot of the compliance and the auditing functions that are being lifted. And there are companies that are being formed that are not in the financial services ecosystem, but are really good tech companies that are trying to be bought or trying to be brought into the fold that don't understand governance, have never been regulated. And I think that is a huge risk. So a little bit of a specialty on financial services, but I think being able to speak to IA governance in particular for those firms, what auditors should be looking for and how they should hold third parties accountable, like Comply, because we wanted to do everything right with the information they're getting and relying on from a materiality perspective. So I just wanted to bring that up. Very exciting times though.
Great. Thank you so much for those contributions. So Keisha, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Right. Well, good morning, everyone. In the questions for discussion, it talked about preparers and auditors, but I want to throw another modification to this and talk about academia and students and faculty usage. Because when we talk about AI, you all have all mentioned the human that's in that process, whether they're in the loop or whether they're leading. But that is the aspect that I just want to bring to everyone's attention, because the use of AI from an student, faculty, academic perspective has evolved. And whether you're looking at inside higher ed's assessment of student use of AI, whether it's the AACSB that accredits all of us and their dean and faculty perspectives, everybody is using it. So that is what we all know. But the risk and the concern is really around, are there appropriate frameworks around effective usage from anywhere from in the classroom to when they get out into internships and things of that nature? And then also really being thoughtful and having some concern around the implications for critical thinking. And so in this setting, when we talk about auditors, when we're talking about the skill sets that are still necessary, we have to really make sure that the messaging, whether that's from the regulator, from others, really articulates the still value of critical thinking and professional skepticism. And so that is really kind of my ask from the PCAOB, is even in your partnership. So I know in the report from the TIA group, it talked about engaging with academia. That is absolutely helpful in making sure that critical thinking is still one of the key items that people are talking about. Firm representatives that are here, you all are doing an excellent job with sharing case studies and things of that nature that we can embed in the classroom. But we also need to think about it as it relates to, supervision and review. How do you review now that you have this AI kind of chatbot that you are very used to using? How do you make sure that there's adequate oversight and supervision and review? And then when you roll it back to the educational setting, making sure that we're telling and helping and coaching students on how to use things ethically, how to use it appropriately. Because even in the academic setting, what everybody has said, we need some framework, we need some guidance. And so, and there's wide variety across institutions about how they do that. So if you're thinking about the future workforce that is coming in, I'm still optimistic. There are still people that want to come into accounting and auditing. Don't believe all the hype. They're still there. It might not be the same numbers, but for those students, we need to make sure that we are impressing upon them the need for critical thinking. So from the regulators, from the practitioners, really making sure when you're engaging with students and faculty members, knowing that AI is a tool, but also making sure that we're not losing sight of them doing critical thinking. And I read one article, maybe some of the case studies or things that we're doing should be tech-free, so that we're still helping them understand how to cultivate these skills that are necessary for audit quality and for investor protection. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share. And I yield my time to some other good colleague that wants to talk.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those observations and recommendations. Board Member Ho, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the comments. I have a teenager, so Keisha, I need a guide on how to, keep my teenager to learn critical thinking without turning to ChatGPT or other tools. But thank you. And I do think that figuring out how to optimize that AI human partnership is the ultimate goal, which is why my question actually is for Dane, because he mentioned the A/B testing, and I'm very curious like what his takeaway was from that. I thought that was really good.
Sure. Sorry, and I just wrote a response in the chat, but I'll share it
Oh,
here. Yeah, I mean, my initial thing is, if folks are seeing immediate cost savings from AI, that worries me because it's actually really expensive in that initial phase. Like I said, we had a human go spend 4 months writing up these summaries. The cool part now is that, something that would take, 4 months, 150 summaries might take a day for a person to do this one activity. Now we can get them instantaneously in a second, right? So they can generate, his 4 months of work is like in a second. But the issue is someone has to go back and check the quality. So now you have somebody who's two of these documents up side by side and painlessly going through 4-page documents and saying, what did it get right? What did it get wrong? Oh, it's added something that human did pick up, which is pretty cool that like there's that element of it. And so like that process of quality control and risk management is crucial there. And then I think then there's also this whole bucketing of tasks, right? Like if we're thinking about in an AGI world 5-10 years ago from now, people are going to migrate to their higher and higher value add task. And the commodity tasks are the things that hopefully we should be kind of pushing over to computers. But you need to kind of risk triage and task by task. Like, is this a high risk, low risk, medium risk task? And for those different levels of risk tolerance, you can accept a different probability of quality. You can accept is it 80% of there for some tasks? Is it 90% of there for some tasks? For some tasks, it has to be 100% there, and we're nowhere near that. So those are things that like we're nowhere near handing those over to computers. But for some things, if they can get things in the right kind of neighborhood, for some low risk tasks, that's totally fine because they're not mission critical. But for all tasks, I think we still have this responsibility when we're kind of handing over a specific task to a computer to make sure that we've kind of gone through this principled approach of like making that decision. Is it high risk? Is it low risk? Does it do well? And then also, it's also this cycle of having to, for some of these things we've been doing for a year and a half, we've had to go back several times because the AI companies keep putting up more powerful models. So we'll be doing a summary one day, literally a next generation model will come out. We'll run the exact same task a day later on the same company, and it's amazingly better. And you get just this much higher improvement. So it's you might go from 50% of the way there one day and literally be at 75% of the way there the next day. So again, this kind of speaks to humans are still going to have to kind of be involved because things are changing so fast, but you have to make an assessment, especially for as you get more mission critical, you have to make a valid assessment for when you're ready to hand it over and when you're willing to trust, because blind trust is a recipe for disaster.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Dane, for those follow-up remarks. I'll hand it back over to Stephen Rivera now.
Sure. Dana, can you hear me? I made my mic a little more sensitive. Hopefully you can hear me better now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
No problem. I just want to follow up on Keisha's point because I'm a big also proponent of the pipeline. And Keisha, I agree with you on the critical thinking, but I also think that we can't lose sight of the human factor of auditing. And I'm talking about a lot of this generation. It's generational. I mean, they are locked in their rooms and they're on their computer or they're on their phone and they're not talking to a human. And I think the audit function, I grew up in public accounting for many years, and the ability to sit down and someone's not telling you the truth, that's not going to happen with AI. And I think that every person that's in auditing needs to have a face-to-face conversation with leadership. And you cannot be doing auditing on the computer to meet people on the computer. I think you got to get out there and you got to talk to people and you got to shake their hands and really size up what's really going on. And I think that we're getting to this society of people just not interacting. And again, we're humans, and that's like a critical part of auditing is like having that face time to know that that person's telling you are they telling you the truth? The notion I just heard, tone at the top. You be able to sense that when you're face to face with a person and not hiding behind the screen. So again, I don't want to ever lose sight of that, because I think that should never go away. And again, if we lose sight of that, I think we'll fail miserably. Because I tell you, when I meet people and my antenna goes up immediately when people are not telling me the truth. And I tell them, some of these young kids in auditing, omission of fact is still lying. And people give you 90% of the story. You got to be able to ask the right questions. And this is something only happens when you have face-to-face contact with key leaders in these companies that are driving markets. So again, I just make my point out there. Critical thinking, but I also need they need to be they got to come out of the office, and they need to have hours and talking to people and meeting clients along the way if truly audit.
Great, thanks for sharing those points, Stephen. So Christian, I believe you're next. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I wanted to comment maybe a little bit about the exchange that Dane was having. I agree with Dane. I think that what he said makes a lot of sense, and it's similar to what we're seeing, particularly with respect to what he was talking about with the A/B testing. But I do think that we're getting to a spot where things are going to change pretty rapidly, and it might advance the conversation just a little bit, or I might be moving a little bit too fast. But because I think that there are some questions coming that are going to address this, but it was just super interesting to hear the way that Dane framed it. Right now, I don't think that we have a lot of trouble in most cases as auditors understanding how the company uses AI and auditing that both substantively and from an ICFR perspective. But if you take an example like a company that uses AI to they run their financial statements through AI. It compares it against the FASB database and the SEC rules and regs database, and it compares it against companies that are similar to them, and it comes out and it fills out the disclosure checklist for them. That's great. It's wonderful technology, but usually a company will have someone then come in over the top and review it and make sure that it all makes sense. And, that's how we then would test the control part of it and, do our own substantive testing. But I think we're getting to a spot, and we'll get to it really rapidly, where what a company will end up doing in order to be efficient and actually much more effective is run their financial statements through and then run it through a different AI model, or AI will also do the review itself, not rely on the human. And that day is coming very, very fast. And that's going to present a challenge, I think, for the auditors, because we no longer have that human so super involved in every aspect of the disclosure checklist. They're only looking for things that AI spit out that need some sort of decision. And that's not the way that auditors think about control points or control risk points. It's not the way that the PCAOB comes in and inspects. And so we're getting to a spot where actually having a human involved in reproducing everything that AI does or looking at the output of everything that AI does is not going to be an effective way to set up a control environment, execute a control environment, audit, and then ultimately have the PCAOB come in and inspect. So we need to think differently about that. And the frameworks that we have right now, or the current rules that the PCAOB has right now, aren't really fit for that sort of environment, but we're getting there very rapidly. So I just wanted to make that point that that day is coming fast. And if we're not ready as a profession, we're really hindering progress there, because that human can go do something else that's more productive when AI can do, not just the process part, but also the control.
Great. Thank you for those observations, Christian. And as you acknowledged, we kind of are moving on to the second set of questions. So Awilda, if you could go ahead and post those questions on the screen, but then we will pick up for those raised that have your hands raised. So I'm not going to read through all of these questions, but they really focus on the impact of the use of AI by audits and preparers. So the first set of questions, we're talking about the state of play, and now we're moving into the impact. And I appreciate we've had some commentary already touch on these, but Awilda, if you could leave these questions up on the screen for a couple of minutes, since I'm not reading them out loud. And with that said, Jennifer Jo, if you want to take over the mic and share your thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments that have made about the importance of the human in the process. And I was pleased when I heard Christian's comments, because I think that is the concern. Are we developing the auditors who have the level of understanding of the process so that when they get the output, they are able to evaluate that output? So yes, you have somebody who, as Dane suggested, you have the A/B process. But when we move to the next phase, when a person never sees the A/B, they just see or never participates in it, but now they've come into the firm and their job is to evaluate the output, right? Do they really understand what they're looking at? Not having had a chance to learn the process. We're talking about the importance of a framework, but more important is the human in the loop needs to have a mental model of the task that the AI system is performing. And so the big challenge is, how are we developing the young professionals who are able to bring that level of critical evaluation and applying the output that they get from the AI? I think we are thinking about that in the academic environment, but there is so much that we can cover, right? In order, and by definition, what we teach in an academic setting is the early stage. It is not the more advanced level processing. And all of the research that has been out so far has shown, whether it be in financial statement analysis, fraud risk assessment, internal control weakness evaluation, is that output is much performance on an audit and audit quality. It's much better when you have both the AI and the human evaluating what are the atypical scenarios that were not considered from the AI output. And I think that is the real challenge going forward.
Thank you very much for that, Jennifer. So Brian Criddle, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. And I agree with Christian on some of the comments that Dane made being extraordinarily interesting and consistent with our experience. Maybe a few things. I mean, and certainly agree on the cost as well. I mean, the incremental upfront cost, especially when you think about the nature of the required human involvement. While I think many are still figuring out how over time you may decrease human involvement, while human might still be in the lead, human involvement may decrease with the right validation and ongoing monitoring and the like. I do think we're in an environment where the costs, at least initially, sometimes can actually be more than actually less. Although you might actually learn a lot more through the process. For us, getting some of these tools in the hands of our people has been, I think, really helpful to educating everyone relative to the way Gen AI works, the way the tools can work, the risks relative to using the tools, and that will help us relative to thinking about the risks at our clients. And I just want to come back to the importance of governance around this, whether we're talking about it at a company and from a preparer perspective, or whether they're talking about it from a firm perspective, is really critical, because whether it's a third-party tool, or whether you're talking about Copilot, ChatGPT, or you're talking about something embedded within SAP or Oracle, or whether you're talking about something the firm or company has developed on their own, or whether you're talking about something that someone within a company or firm on their own just begins to use because it's sort of publicly available. I think there are risks to all of those, and I think it's important that there's the right governance, the right policies within organizations, and then the right transparency within organizations to be sure that the risks are being appropriately managed. Because to the extent, particularly in larger organizations, someone thinks there's no use of Gen AI within the organization, they're probably not accurate, and that there are probably at least some using it for some degree of acceleration of tasks that they're performing, even though they're not relying on it. And so I do think that becomes very critical. We've gotten deeper in the conversations we have with management and the inquiries that we're making, and understanding the company's control environment, understanding their use cases, understanding where they have implemented in operations and the effect that can have and how it can manifest in financial reporting errors. And again, I do think some of the points being made by Jennifer and others, just relative to the training on this, the behavioral aspects of this, the risk assessment questions on the screen. I think we'll be thinking about risk assessment relative to the way we conduct our audits and the way we think about the nature of risks that may become more likely than they had in the past, or unexpected risks that we'll see in the future. Really will change the way we think about risk assessment fairly dramatically. And all the learning that we're doing now ourselves by early adoption of some of these tools, not in a way that we're where the human has the right involvement, it is instructive to us in thinking about the kinds of risks that could manifest in financial reporting as we see these tools evolve. Obviously, there'll be some that get ahead and do this faster than others, and those that do it faster than others that are well controlled, obviously we'll see the most benefit from, and then there'll be some that presumably, unfortunately, will get ahead without the right controls, and that will manifest itself in whether it be operational problems or financial reporting issues. That's something that we'll need to address as part of the audit ultimately. So I really just wanted to emphasize that I think as you think about the control environment here, when you think about companies in the first instance and the way they think about their controls on risk assessment and monitoring, and then ultimately their control activity level controls from a COSO perspective, really important to begin to just think about the implications and making sure that there's good transparency within organizations relative to what the thought process is and how they're connected to their controls, as we begin to see the shift where there is degrees of either reliance or use cases that are moved from development or kind of the developmental stage or research stage into actual use in financial reporting. So I think the risk assessment question is very important. And then maybe just the last thing, which Christian mentioned, and I agree. I mean, today's standards aren't really, they don't address obviously a lot of this specifically. I do think there's a lot of basic concepts around professional skepticism and around audit evidence and other concepts within PCAOB standards that are certainly very, very relevant. And we obviously all think about that as we think about the risks here. I think it probably is time for the PCAOB to begin to articulate the connectivity to their standards on these concepts. I know there was some of that in the initial spotlight, but I think the more of that's done, the better. The risk that I see from a profession perspective is that there will be some who get ahead of themselves on this, and to the extent that becomes pervasive in any way, or even if there's a large incident as a result, there'll be taint on the entire profession as a result of whether others are also getting ahead of themselves, either from a preparer or auditor perspective. And I think, obviously there's a degree of managing and people take risk as they develop new technology and implement new technology, but I think it needs to be done in an appropriately measured manner with the right transparency to avoid there being a lack of confidence or an implication to confidence from a financial reporting perspective. So just wanted to add some of those comments.
Thank you very much for those contributions, Brian. Keisha, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Very quickly, just to touch on a point about, I heard earlier, the PCAOB kind of staff needing training and things of that nature. Is this an opportunity for the PCAOB to really engage with some of these third-party providers of activity. I mean, even in the Wall Street Journal article that mentioned about AI, being used in writing financial reports, there was, everybody's trying to sell services around this. But I just want to elevate and just say this might be an opportunity for the PCAOB to actually be, somewhat proactive in engaging with some of these third-party providers just to understand the product, to get a sense as to what it is, so that, you can be responsive when you're thinking about any guidance or things of that nature. But I think the more that you can engage with the third-party providers, get the tools in the hands of people so you can kind of get a better understanding, that might be helpful as we're, dealing with this very, very fast-paced environment. And so I just want to kind of share that is something to consider, that might be helpful as you're thinking about how to get better guidance out there, be very responsive. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much for those recommendations. So Kurt Schoch, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. And it looks like you might just need a brief.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect.
That work? Okay,
Yep,
good.
great.
Nice to see everybody. This is my first meeting, so bear with me as I ask a couple of rookie questions here. I mean, this sort of boils down to an over-reliance question for me, and if we had preparers AI that does the work, and then we had auditor AI that does the audit, and they just shook electronic hands, and we said that's great, that would be over-reliance, and maybe we're headed there at some point. But is the PCAOB role in this, or is it informed on what over-reliance we're actually talking about? I'm confused by if this is over-reliance by the preparer on its AI that the auditor should have noticed, or is it the over-reliance by the auditor on its own AI tools, and why didn't the auditor's AI detect the preparer's AI bobbles, for example? So that's one question. And do you think, as regulators, that the audit partner doesn't know or won't know what the over-reliance pitfalls are, the non-human, the no-human pitfalls, as we get this built out? And Christian and Brian talked a little bit about that. So are you looking at, are you considering over-reliance prevention standards by the PCAOB? Is that the end game here? Thanks.
Kurt, I'll reply briefly, although I'll also leave it open for others. I mean, I do think AI is a matter of potential concern. Similarly, we've had that same concern over data analytics. Now, I'm not sure that we saw that pan out as a result. And I think within your question, there's probably several areas where there could be there could at some point in the future be over-reliance by the preparer, and there as I understand, I've lost Zoom again. So I will defer to my esteemed colleagues on the call to see if they also want to take a chance to respond to your question.
Hearing nothing from our PCAOB colleagues and board members on the line. So right now I'm going to pass it over to Christine for your comments. But at any point, if anyone else would like to chime in to respond to Kurt's questions, please feel free to do so. But Christine, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. I don't want to be redundant, so I'm not going to comment on how AI affects risk assessment and controls and audit evidence. I agree with much of what has been said on that. I did want to comment on the audit committee reaction, because we haven't spent as much time on that issue, and I spent a lot of time talking to audit committees. And the way I would describe this is, I don't see them having concerns. That was a word used in the question with it. But in a good way, I see that they have healthy questions, and they are very interested in understanding how does AI drive our audit? How does it increase audit quality? How exactly are we using this? And I see this not just with the audit committee, but certainly management of companies are very interested in this as well. And they like demonstrations. I've met with several audit committees where they like to see the actual tools through a hands-on demonstration so they can understand, or can we use 100% sampling as an example? And, you know, what are the efficiencies and how is the audit more effective? Again, all leading to a higher quality audit. They do ask questions certainly about confidentiality and data privacy and security of their data. So that's where they ask questions. But once that is explained, I don't see concerns about that issue in general. And one other different topic just to mention while I have the floor briefly is as far as frameworks and standard setting, I do think it's very important to think about a principle-based model given how fast-moving technology is. And of course, AI is not a new technology in of itself. The changes to it are new. And so we just need to be cognizant of that as we consider it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Christine. I'll hand the floor over to Jim Freese.
Thank you. I'm picking up exactly along this lines from the audit committee and my discussions even this morning as an audit committee chair of a company. There's somewhat of a asymmetry in the question number 6 when I look at it from an audit committee, meaning that I know the procedures that I have in terms of inside the company with the preparers use of AI, but I have a little bit of a different take than that of Christine from the aspect of the auditor's use of AI, particularly along the environment, everything that we've been saying about how quickly things are changing and how quickly it's inevitable that there's adoption by some of the auditors. And the reason why I put it in a short-term versus a long-term situation, we had a number of comments about the importance of critical thinking and professional skepticism and how we bring that forward for the next generation, whether it be students or younger people working them up. But frankly, as my gray hair shows, my kids can pick up an iPhone or something or AI and will much more quickly adapt to it. And frankly, my experience is that when the partner comes in and they bring somebody to give me a demo or they hand it over to who's actually doing the sample testing or running some of these new tools, it is usually a younger in age, but some newer person. And part of the training and the point I want to need to emphasize is that the partners actually know how these tools work and the partners are able to exercise the professional skepticism over what's coming forward. Because frankly, when I'm sitting there as an audit committee chair, if I have an issue or there's an issue raised within the team questions that are coming, I will bring those issues and have my discussions at the partner level, not at the working level. So total different take on the aspect of where some of the gaps are and really fully understanding implications.
Great. Thank you for that very much, Jim. So I'll go ahead and move it over to Steve Morrison. Oh, Steve, you're coming in on, I don't see you on mute, but your audio is not coming in. I'm going to go ahead and move it over to Jim Hunt. And then, oh, can you try again, Steve?
I'm here now.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this goes to the whole technology that the last speaker spoke to is that we all have our Achilles heels. Mine happens to be which of the 4 microphones that are sitting around me at my desk is on at any one time. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. I'm with a firm that is noticeably smaller than the other firms. However, we're 4,000 people strong, roughly $1 billion in revenues. And so we do have a lot of clients, primarily private, but we do have an SEC practice as well. And so a lot of these same issues come to us as well. Most of our client base is not necessarily using AI to the extent that I think some of the larger firms have there, but on our own end, we are using certain tools, including some of the ones that Bob had mentioned a little bit earlier, with the emphasis of the person being of a person, our people being in the lead. Professional skepticism is emphasized. And I did note what Brian Croto said about starting to use these tools and setting up our own internal governance around them has been very informative, not only for the national office function, but also for our line auditors as well. It's a different perspective of looking at what not too long ago was being done with pieces of paper and different literal books. So much of auditing at the end of the day, whether it's with AI or whether it's with the pen and paper, is asking that question of how do you know? And so I could tell the preparers, the investors, and the auditors here really care, which has made this a great conversation. What I will add to this, because I basically agree with a lot of what was already indicated, but to add to it, smaller entities, which there are a lot of them that are out there, they may be cash strapped and not necessarily have the funds to set up the appropriate governance for AI, amongst other elements of internal control over financial reporting. So having something like a Chat GPT or Copilot or so forth to do, like what Dane was saying about take someone that was going to take 4 months to do an exercise and do it in 1 second may be done without the appropriate governance over this and oversight from management's perspective. And one risk I'll bring up as well, and this is both for the preparers and for the auditors, is the use of AI that's not disclosed to either. So those employees that may have important roles in internal control that are using AI in some manner, and it's not being noticed by management or the auditor, and that could certainly influence the internal and the external risk assessment that's there. So by analogy, Dane's example, that person that's taking 4 months to do this activity, maybe they only took 1 second to do it, and the other 3.9 months they're out on the beach waiting for something there. So certainly would influence the risk assessment. And on the overall issue with standards and the framework, that we do have when you take a look at the standards that are there, I think it's hard to say that there's not applicability there, sufficient appropriate audit evidence, concepts of relevance and reliability. But I think it gets more into the deeper understanding of what I guess I would call application guidance of what could go wrong, particularly with AI. I think it'd be very hard to have a very specific standard at this time, because the AI that we're using now is probably not the same AI and the same capacities that's going to be used in 6 months, a year there. So hence the importance of a principle-based nature. And to the extent the AI CPA and the IAASB both have technology task force that are out there, the IAASB even has its own page of a whole bunch of different primers and guidance that's there. I would encourage the PCAOB to encourage, I know there's the spotlights and there's been already some content that are out there. But I do think that, and this is just me speaking anecdotally, I don't really have any evidence to support this. I do suspect that there's a lot of knowledge being gained on private company audits about the use of AI by auditors or the use of AI by clients, so as to avoid ambiguity going into PCAOB inspections. So having that kind of dialogue with the AI CPA and the IAASB, I think could provide some important input to the PCAOB. That's it for me.
Great. Thank you very much for those contributions, Steve. I'll move it over now to Jim Hunt.
Hey, thanks, Danny. Good morning, everybody. Focusing on question 6 from the audit committee perspective, 2 aspects from the preparer's viewpoint and the auditor's viewpoint. As Christine and Jim have suggested, I think not really concerned of my observation being chairman of 2 audit committees in my reading, that we're very concerned from a preparer's perspective, because while there's experimentation going on it's still very much kept in a small box, and the review process is very significant. Again, anecdotally, I know of at least one major company CFO who's told me, I've got an entire 10Q prepared by AI, but I'm not filing it as such. I'm still filing the one that we do. So we're still in that experimental stage. From the auditor's perspective, the use of AI kind of follows off on our long discussions now for the last maybe 8 or 10 years about the use of technology in auditing. Obviously, AI is the next step and much more specific. And the typical use of technology in auditing has been of interest to the audit committees from a couple of perspectives, and that is first efficiency, and secondly, some of the controls and other considerations of the auditors entering more into our systems in order to have bigger sample sizes or entire populations. And so as we think about AI moving into the audit considerations, it'll be a natural, although much more advanced, takeoff from there. I would fear that our first consideration, perhaps as audit committee members, might be efficiency and cost, but I hope we think about them much more from the perspective of higher quality auditing, specifically in areas that are very hard to, hard judgment areas, those areas where they're CAM related and there's significant judgment. And we can, to use the conversations that Keisha mentioned, we can augment our critical thinking by looking at an entire population of all the known information that's available on a particular matter that the auditor is endeavoring to audit. So hopefully we'll be moving to those in those directions. I think that's everything. I mean, perhaps even in the consideration from the auditor's perspective, maybe a little bit more opportunity in the audit of, not the audit, but the consideration of fraud potential in the audit, and the consideration of those things that are deemed as company failures or audit failures that are very obvious in the cold light of day after they've happened and been analyzed. Maybe a case in point is a couple of bankruptcies recently related to private credit that perhaps using AI in the audit could help detect and consider. I'll stop there and thank you again.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim, for those perspectives from an audit committee point of view. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Stephen Lipner now.
Thank you for that. And I'm also going to pile on a bit on question 6 from an audit committee perspective, being a member on a couple of audit committees here. I think ultimately, and I do believe Christine may have mentioned this previously, ultimately from an audit committee perspective is help us understand how the use of AI will enhance audit quality. I think that is the fundamental question. And maybe peeling that onion back, just a bit, give us a little high-level transparency on how that has enhanced or will change your end-to-end processes. Additionally, what does that mean to the from a talent strategy perspective for the auditor going forward? And I guess I would be remiss not to ask the question, what will that mean to fees down the road, realizing and fully appreciating that there is a rather large upfront investment that is being made by the auditor, as all organizations are doing, and that will take some time to recoup. But will there be an impact to fees? And again, at the end of the day, how will AI make us, from a client perspective, better? Thank you.
Great. Thank you again for those audit committee perspectives. So I'll hand it over next to Jamila Mayfield.
Thank you. Piling on, like Stephen said, I'm an audit committee chair. And, when I joined this board, one of the things I did was looked at, in depth with the finance, the CFO, like how they use tools and technology. I had an understanding of them from being a former EY partner. And so similarly to what Stephen said, there's a lot of side by side. We want to see what the IA can do while we're producing reports, which is great. Still kinks, so nobody's relying on them fully, but they're also giving me insights, showing me stuff, sending me reports on things that they're thinking of going full bore with. And I think that's important, definitely for the chair of the audit committee to get a little bit of a preview before it moves further down the line. And to the fee comment, that their question comes up every quarter. Like, and now we're talking about the auditors getting engaged for the next year. And CFO finance team is like, hey, you know, these fees aren't getting any cheaper, but we don't want to, you know, in any way sacrifice quality and, you know, Four Eyes checks and all the segregation of duties that we expect for our audit. So I think that tension is going to get interesting, right? Because there will be, like I mentioned earlier, tech companies that will get bought by some of the auditing firms that are younger folks that may not have the regulatory background starting to do this stuff. And hopefully they'll come into the fold and understand this is a regulated entity and you can't just, it's not speed. Right? It's absolutely accuracy, completeness, and the things that we expect to be able to see as an audit committee chair. So wanted to highlight that. Also highlight Keisha's point on talent at Comply, where I'm constantly hiring people to help me use AI to deliver better financial reporting. I don't think there's an appreciation yet for our young people on how important it is to, like, if there's no governance there, right, which we're all trying to develop, SEC, PCAOB, what do you think the appropriate internal controls should be for something, so that as we're trying to implement it, maybe ahead of the regulation, how can we make clients feel good? How can we make auditors feel good and relying on our reports? I think third parties, we want to do the right thing, and we're going to be a key, I think, in the beginning to audit reliance. And so what can third parties, you know, be thinking about from a control perspective, and getting our young people to think about it to inform the control conversation. I think that's going to be really important. I wanted to give those two comments.
Great. Thank you very much for those perspectives. So we'll move over to Jennifer Zhou now.
Yeah, thank you. One of the reactions I had, sort of a broad reactions to the Spotlight material and then the TIA working group documents that were shared. And I think some of the things that came through is sort of this divide between the more global firms and the resources they have to apply towards AI versus the smaller firms. And then the PCAOB's own staff not necessarily having all of the expertise. And I know that I think this can be solved a couple of ways. One of the first reactions I had in looking at the Spotlight is that the Spotlight is, you know, very general. Maybe that's by design, but it really does not say much as to what the firms are really doing. For example, you know, they're using it for risk. Well, what types of risk assessments? How is it being leveraged in the audit? If one reads that, we still don't have a really good understanding of what's being applied. And then if we look at the working group and all of the questions that they have developed, it comes through to me that the PCAOB's staff currently might not have the resources, but the PCAOB has great access with, you have the working group, you have young academics. You currently bring people, the PhD students and academics in, but you bring one person at a time on rotation. I think this is an opportunity to create an AI think tank within the PCAOB for a short period. Maybe you bring in a team of 6 people, a mixture of some professors as well as some doctoral students, maybe some practitioners, very focused on AI and auditing, and then using all of the inspections documents that you have to develop this framework that can be used and can allow for more of an egalitarian approach to AI. And I think that's something the board should, you know, might want to give some consideration to.
Great. Thank you very much for those recommendations, Jennifer. Brian Croto, I see your hand raised, so we'll move over to you.
Yep, and there were a lot of questions, so I'll come to maybe some other topics that were in those questions that you had. There's been a lot said around audit committees, and so I won't repeat any of that. I think it's a good dialogue. But when you think about transparency relative to use, there are some other things we've spent a lot of time thinking about and training on, and we've updated policy and guidance around it. And that's transparency among the engagement team relative to where the technology is being used, how it's being used, so that those that are involved in supervising and reviewing, first of all, are involved up front relative to the decision making as to what's being used where, but then also are informed relative to the review processes. The same is true for component auditors to understand where different technology, including Gen AI, might be being used relative to component work that is being supervised by the lead auditor. And then, obviously the transparency with the audit committee is important. So I wanted to mention those. Then relative to some things that others have been doing, I don't think anyone's mentioned yet, the CAQ did publish a document on the role of the auditor in AI, both present and future, just last month. And I know we and others were involved in that. And I think it's it's obviously an evolving space, but I do think it's a good publication, at least to ground people a little bit in where we think as a profession things stand today, and the role that auditors can have both from a financial statement perspective and incrementally in some cases relative to AI assurance and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to mention that. And then I know like the ASB, for example, we had commented at the AICPA that we thought this would be an important area as part of their strategic plan going forward in their standard setting. And I know it's a prominent factor that they've gotten their draft strategic plan that I think they're discussing maybe this week, but for the 26 to 30 strategic plan, it is a prominent factor, and it's one of their key 5 initiatives relative to the focus on technology, including Gen AI, as they think about updating standards. The FRC also, I know we've talked before, but the FRC has had some publication in this space that I think has been informative and I think could be looked to as well. We certainly have considered it in the context of some of the work that we're doing. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, at least for now, is AI washing and maybe disclosure that we see at times. And I know in some cases, and it may be unintentional, right? But some may go beyond, or you may read a disclosure or public statement and think that maybe a company is doing something more than they are in their operations or otherwise. And that's been something that I know the SEC's commented on, but as well, I think that's an area relative to at least even financial reporting. We've seen in some instances some kind of get ahead of or begin to describe things in a way that some may assume more than is intended relative to what one is doing. So I just bring that point maybe to go back to almost the beginning on transparency again. Good for companies to be thinking about as well relative to their own disclosures in this space. But we've certainly observed there can be instances where that can be either misunderstood or perhaps overstated in some regards. So I think another area for attention and focus more broadly.
Great. Thank you very much for those contributions, Brian. Awilda, could you go ahead and bring up our slides back on the screen? And as my colleague Awilda is doing that, Jim Freese, if you want to go ahead. Awilda, can you go back just one slide for a brief moment? And Jim, I'll hand the floor over to you for your comments.
I just want to say that that's an excellent point by Brian a second ago, that the AI washing or the claims of usage, it's frankly a type of fraud by many companies, and especially the aspects of, call it a valuation bubble, or certainly unprecedented valuations based on expectations that may or may not prove to be true. That's an important awareness matter and something that the SEC was focused on. It's not so clear to me that continues to be focused on with some challenge of the government. So certainly something that would be important for auditors to keep an eye out for.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Jim. I am leaving questions 3 through 7 up just for a brief moment to ensure that no one else has any other contributions they'd like to make in respect of these questions. Not seeing anything. So Awilda, could you advance the slides here? Thank you very much. So these last 2 questions for our artificial intelligence discussion really focus on recommendations for the PCAOB, and we've really already started covering that in a lot of the existing discussion and ongoing discussion. So I think we've heard calls for frameworks related to governance, for possible guidance. We've maybe heard a little bit less about standard setting, but we would, as part of question 8, like standard that SEAG members feel need to evolve as a result of bear with me one second. My Zoom seems to have tried to reset to evolve as a result of the current use of AI. Okay, everyone. I believe I am back. Barb, can you verify
You're
that?
back.
Okay, thank you. I seem to have the same in-office issues that Barb had there briefly, so apologies for that. What I was saying is that we've probably heard a little bit less on the standard setting front so far, so we would like to explore question 8, specific areas of the auditing standards that may need to evolve as a result of AI tools currently being used or being explored by auditors or preparers. And then again, if you have any additional thoughts on a framework that you haven't already shared regarding the responsible use of AI in auditing, we'd love to hear those thoughts. And in reality, any recommendations you have for the PCAOB, even if they fall outside of these two questions, we'd be more than happy to hear and appreciate your contributions. So I'm going to open up my hand list. Okay, so with that said, I will hand it to Jeff Mahoney.
Danny, thank you. I apologize, but I'm still on question 7. So just a comment related to question 7 with respect to smaller accounting firms. So I ran across an article. It's a June 4th, 2025 article in Reuters. And the title of the article is Thrive-backed accounting firm Crete to spend $500 million in AI roll-up. And so the story talks about Crete Professionals Alliance as being one of the fastest growing accounting firms in the country. And it appears that they do have some affiliates that do some public company audits as well. And the story's interesting in that it suggests that Thrive Capital, who's providing funding for this accounting roll-up, has software engineers developing AI accounting tools to be used by Crete Professionals Alliance to expand their customers and to take on more work. It's not clear from the article whether accountants and auditors are involved in this process at all, or whether the PCAOB or anyone else has any supervision as to what these tools are and what benefit they may have, or the level of benefit they may have for audit quality. So I just wanted to point that article out. There does seem to be at least smaller firms that are developing these AI tools that may get less oversight or attention than what the larger firms on this call are doing. And I guess my comment or question is, does the PCAOB have any insight as to what's going on in this particular case and whether these tools are actually going to enhance audit quality? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jeff. To the degree any of my PCAOB colleagues want to respond directly, feel free to. While you have a chance to think over that, I am going to hand it over to Sandy Peters.
Thanks. I was responding to sort of 8 and 9 collectively. I think the discussion of AI and the anecdotal examples are interesting, but to me it feels like that what the PCAOB needs to do is they really need to go through key audit areas and key assertions and key tools and develop themes related to what may need to change, because I don't think we can do it from sort of anecdotal illustrations, right? I should say ad hoc anecdotal illustrations. I think we need illustrations or use cases and say, what assertion are we using? What's testing? What's the criticality of accuracy in this? Is there, what degree is the human involved in the process? Because only then, when you have from those assertions tested, could you actually really decide if you need to check individual standards, or you need to change individual standards, or if you need a sort of an overarching standard? And what do you do when you're using a tool that you don't have control over, sort of, just like you may use a service provider when it comes to, fair value as one example, right? But I think there's just a sort of overall collage that needs to be collected so that, we can go to another level and evaluate that. It occurred to me as I was thinking about this and people were talking, an interesting question is, does AI become a critical audit matter? We generally think of critical audit matters as an area, but if this permeates everything, is it in and of itself a critical audit matter? But anyway, I just throw that out there as sort of it's just a rhetorical question right now.
Thank you very
And
much.
it's an interesting question, Sandy. Thank you for that.
Great. So Brian, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks. And I'll take a shot. I love that question. Maybe on Sandy's point about whether it's a standard or throughout the standards. My sense at the moment is it's really, because if you think about like risk assessment and audit evidence and some of the transparency we talked about with audit committees and certainly among the engagement teams, supervision review, component auditor, lead auditor, like I believe that this is something that is going to be pervasive throughout the standards relative to thinking about potential implication. And that's not to say, so I don't think there's probably one standard one would write, but I also don't necessarily think you need to necessarily specifically address Gen AI in every aspect of every standard, right? Like technology is going to evolve, and I think trying to do that in a timely manner, in a helpful manner, may cause more harm than good. At the same time, I think making sure there's clarity kind of on the PCAOB's expectations around the consideration of Gen AI or any technology relative to some of those kinds of concepts and provisions in your standards is probably what's important. And there's probably lots of ways to do that through guidance, and there's probably some degree of standard setting that could be done. But I would think it's probably not just a kind of a single standard, but certainly interested in lots of perspectives on that. On Sandy's point on CAMs, I think it's a good point. I mean, I think you could get into a circumstance where I don't think AI wouldn't be the CAM, but certainly if a company used AI or any other technology in a way that made the audit particularly challenging or complex, that could drive a CAM. Certainly, we're not in an environment where we've seen anything close to that today. But you certainly could see that could cause the audit to be more complex, particularly or challenging, particularly if it's not done in a well-controlled way, where you might even have a material weakness. And as those things start to arise, you could see it drive a CAM in one or more areas of the audit. So it's a great call out. Hopefully not soon.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I agree with what you said on the beginning part, but I'm not sure what the right answer is as an individual standard or an overall standard. And I respect your position on pervasiveness, but I think that one of the challenges is bringing everyone along.
Yeah.
And in that thinking. And so I think the PCAOB needs to develop not ad hoc anecdotal conversations about it, but a framework for thinking about how they look at AI. And to me, the best thing is to start with use cases and find common themes, and then decide if you work that back into individual or whatever standards. It's just really, for me, a way of it's hard for me to know what the right answer is, because all the tools are different and every assertion that I'm using them in is different. And so, it depends, right? So what are the themes? I guess that's what I'm trying to ascertain.
I totally agree with that. And that's why I was saying as well, you might end up with something that is more, you could have different views as to whether you do it through one standard in some way or whether it's pervasive. But yeah, I agree with you.
Great. Thank you for that discussion, Brian and Sandy. So Colleen Hodensberg, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Yeah, just very quickly, the specific standard and specific question that I've heard from folks is the reperformance, and that it would be helpful for the PCAOB to just give some sense of what exactly are we trying to accomplish with respect to reperformance.
Colleen, if I could probe a little bit, what could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean? Is it the auditor you're suggesting is reperforming something, or?
So I've heard this actually from internal side, in that if they are preparing things, that then the auditor needs to reperform, and if you're using AI, it's not going to be exactly the same. And so I've heard it stated as a hindrance to issuers on the issuer side.
Okay, thanks. I mean, my view, the standards don't really require the auditor to reperform. The auditor always has flexibility generally with their audit approach, but happy to understand there may be more to that I'm not
Well, I think
capturing.
even just clarifying that and just clarifying the goal and saying it doesn't have to come out exactly the same, but just this is sort of what we are looking for would be really helpful.
Thank you. That is helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Colleen and Barb. So Dane, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Sure. And this might be a bit of an extension from what I said earlier, but at least like kind of my vision for all of this, I try to think in practical terms. With audit program, audit papers, I can just envision there's a paper that's the AI papers, right? And so every year they come and they look at the papers and they say, here's how we've kind of inventory the different tasks where we're applying AI. We've made a risk assessment in terms of like mission critical, level of task that we're now employing it. A description of what that AI is doing, the process by which you've made a decision to use it or not use it, your a human judgment about what percentage of the way it is towards human level acceptable criteria, and then what model you're using, because there's a proliferation of AI models. So you're going to get different answers with different models. You're going to get different answers with the same model when it upgrades to a new iteration of the model. So you need that documentation about when you're doing your assessments and what context are you making those assessments, what model, what date, did you do multiple models, or so all these kind of specificities are important, because then as you come around to next year's audit and you want to look, you have to have a starting point, and you should be able to look at those things. You should be able to see if certain activities have gone stale or you haven't reassessed them recently, and so I think that's something. Different companies are going to be at different places in their AI journey. I don't think we can have a prescriptive one size fits all about this is how to apply things, because just the diversity in practice has to be enormous. But we do need to have a process that takes inventory as to where a specific company is in its journey, what kind of responsible, back testing or A/B testing that they're doing to actually kind of confirm whether they are verifying, not just trusting the AI. So all that documentation should give someone kind of a color of like where a company is and where those risks lie. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Dane, for those insights and recommendations. Laura Phillips, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, we've heard a lot of comments this morning already that whatever you do, it's essential that it be principles based. And absolutely, I think that's an imperative for the board, particularly in standard setting, that auditing standards remain principles based. That is, for me, without question, principles based standards, what both allows and forces audits to be truly responsive to the unique and specific risks of each particular engagement, right? And that, to me, is an essential part of where the critical thought comes in of how do the principles apply in the specific circumstances. At the highest level in terms of audit principles, right, an audit results in reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. I don't think it'll ever be appropriate for audits of financial statements or internal control to target absolute assurance. I don't think that'll ever be in the public interest. But I do think that how we think about what it means to obtain reasonable assurance is probably going to evolve as technology evolves. As the board thinks about standard setting, Kara asked the question at the very beginning, right? How to balance standard setting and guidance. My advice would be to generally be agile in guidance and be as circumspect and restrained as possible in standard setting. I think there is quickly quite a challenge or dilemma that can arise in terms of standard setting and retaining principles-based standards. And you're square in that dilemma already when you're contemplating a standard specifically on AI, to me, of would such a standard still be principles-based, or are you already starting to get into something that could be more prescriptive, especially as fast evolving as this area would be? One of my recommendations to Barb and the team and the board would be to think about a decision framework for yourselves of, when is standard setting really required here, and when is something better addressed in guidance, and whether that starts to feel something like, challenging yourselves on what in the existing standards is insufficient or an impediment, versus is the overarching principle something that can be, well explained and connected, as folks have suggested already. Yes, avail yourselves of all the fabulous experts and stakeholders across this ecosphere that are going to want to help and help understand that. I think they can also help clarify and suss out what are the places in the standards, if any, where there really are, impediments or insufficiencies versus what can be addressed better in guidance. I think
Thank you, Laura. Sage standard setting advice.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So we'll move over to Jim Freese.
Thanks. I wanted to build on a theme coming through as I see it, reading the last three speakers. And that's when we talk about AI, people are going back and forth with examples, but usually referring to different large language models. And we know that by definition, they're probabilistic, they're not deterministic. So when we talk about reperformance, they don't always come up with the same answer by definition, right? To use Dane's words, he said, if we use different models, we can get different answers. If we use different versions, we can get different answers. But I'll add the third point that by definition, we can run it through the same model and get different answers because it comes up with the same probabilistic component. And I guess that's the aspect that I just want to raise, because it seems to me it is logical to use it for steps like reperformance, but we need to know the limitations in using that because we, by definition, do not have a deterministic model. So if we recreate in an LLM procedural steps within a company, we can come out with a different answer at least a certain amount of the time. And so the second comment beyond knowing those limitations is, I don't think anybody's mentioned it today, but something I spend time with and work with some companies that look at is mitigating hallucinations that can come out more broadly when you're talking about more unstructured data and more unstructured processes. But there are ways, there are steps to also have your agents or to control through a type of guardrails, which is a word that we've used, some of the output before we blindly rely on the results of the LLM. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much for raising those points, Jim. Stephen Rivera, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. When I looked at question number 9 and looking about developing a framework, I kind of I'm going back to what I said right from the beginning. I think we most likely we need a standard that really addresses the data governance and privacy. I think that's kind of really critical on this whole process. I mean, that's like the starting point of all use of AI. So the quality of that data, the accuracy of that data, the security of that data is going to be really important. And I think a standard that kind of captures that holistically, I think is really important for how AI should be used, at least from an audit standpoint. And again, the other issue is privacy. I mean, that's kind of a side topic, but I think it's really important because I think people are using some of this and maybe not using it the right way, and it could be harmful. So the question is, how do we have standards around the use of that privacy? And then I think maybe the other thought would be is accountability for folks in the company. Like, who is actually responsible? Who's using it? And is there a way to have the auditor know who's using AI within the company so they understand how it's being applied? So having that, I would call that audit trail, like who's doing it manually, who's using AI for this type of work. I think that's really important to have that accountability and know that as part of, if I'm the auditor, I want to know how it's being used as I'm doing the auditor and where it's being applied in my audit by the company I'm auditing. So I think that's important for the at least for documentation. Thanks for at least giving some of my thoughts on that.
Great, Stephen. Thank you for those points. Interesting items to think about how that works in with our current standards. So Preeti Chowdhury, I believe you're next.
Thanks, Danny. I agree with Stephen. I was going to say some key aspects of thinking about the principles-based standards. They would need to address data integrity, as he said, as well as security and privacy, data and the governance of AI. But in addition to that, some other things to think about would be documentation of kind of the logic of the model in terms of the task that it's being applied to, what assumptions are being made when somebody is using the AI, and how the AI was, or the Gen AI was trained. If there are performance benchmarks, so that somebody could validate periodically. And then to go back and reassess, I think it was Dane who brought up that the models update quite frequently, and then that can change things. And so how often is somebody going back to reevaluate that it is actually still doing the task reliably? And then another issue is to consider like model drift. These models can start to drift in a direction and can deviate quite a bit. And so what are the controls, prevention and detection controls around evaluating that?
Preeti, that's super interesting. If I could clarify, when you talked about documentation, are you talking about the auditor's models, the preparer's models, or both?
I was talking about the preparer's aspect when they're using the AI for what the auditor should be evaluating.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, but I do, before we wrap up, want to draw your attention to maybe two topics that appear in the chat to see if anyone has any views. And I know we didn't ask anyone to prepare for that, but there's a question from board member Ho. To what extent can ISO 42001 and NIST AI risk management framework, can they be adapted by the PCAOB? And then there's also a question about guidance as it relates to testing ICFR as companies embed AI in their processes and controls. Maybe question back to the auditors on that. Have you already addressed that topic in methodology, like understanding that things are changing and changing rapidly, but do you already see that, and have you already taken steps to address that? So I'll put those two questions out to the group.
Go ahead, Brian Croto.
Yep. So I think those are both great questions. The second one first, I agree with Christian that from an ICFR perspective, certainly it's an area that should be of focus. And I think I probably left that off the list as I was rattling off your standards earlier. QC 1000 or QC, your implementation of your quality controls is another important area. But we've begun relative to the efforts to think about guidance in this space and policy in this space. Obviously, we're doing that kind of as we go and as we learn what companies are doing. But at the same time, I think it's important to start with a management perspective first. And I think it is important for companies to be thinking about, how do I think about it in the context of COSO? COSO did issue something, although it's been quite some time now. I think it was back from 2021 and was maybe the publication. But thinking about how companies design controls around this, particularly as you start thinking about degrees of reliance and having reliability assessments and ongoing monitoring, to the extent that you're relying to some extent more on the technology and beginning to minimize or reduce the amount of human involvement based on that comfort you're able to take. That's where I think over time we'll all learn together as to what companies are doing in that space and how we evaluate that. It's something probably for COSO to be thinking about, the SEC to be thinking about as well. But that's an evolving area, I would say, and I think it's ripe for further discussion and perhaps even guidance. And then relative to Board Member Ho's question, I do think in particular NIST, from a governance perspective, but otherwise, I think is a great place to look and start. And there's a lot you can leverage there. Certainly in the non-audit space, there's readiness work that we've worked with companies on, and certainly talked about publicly assurance in this space, using that as a framework. And that's more in the non-audit space relative to operations and things that we do with our non-audit clients. But I mention that only because I think it can have relevance here too, relative to the financial reporting space. And so I think that's an important place that one could look. Not to say that there's not stuff from ISO 42001, but I think in particular NIST is where we're sort of more focused.
Very helpful, Brian. Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Oh, Dang.
Thanks. Sorry. And I did put this in the chat, but I thought, Stephen brought up a good point about responsibility, and maybe we haven't highlighted this enough, but I do think when folks are handing tasks over to AI, there always still needs to be a documented person who's responsible for whatever that AI is doing, because that makes sure that there's someone in the loop and that they are, continuing their comfort with that. And I know for not just AI, but for all our tech projects that we work on, and I work on several of them, I'm an owner of that project, and that's important because I know I have responsibility over things and, kind of the data governance and all the other aspects of it. And, if we are moving into this phase where more and more things will be handed over, that, yes, ultimate responsibility, like in the audit context, lies with the audit partner. But even as you kind of go down to these lower tasks, because it is very, I think of it in terms of a task-based approach, who owns that task? And, if they are employing their AI army of agents to do these things, it's kind of like they're their manager, and that all needs to be documented so they take that responsibility seriously. Thanks.
Thank you, Dane. Amy Beers?
Hi, thank you. I am from the AICPA, and I wanted to just comment on some of the things that we've been working on related to AI. And I've been listening to everybody talk, and I've appreciated the comments about the fact that, we are in a very rapidly changing environment. The AI is constantly changing. It would be very difficult potentially to do and work on standards in this space because of this changing technology, and whatever you put out potentially might change. And given the length of time it does take to issue standards, things could be quite different by the time the standard is finally published. But with that, we are in the process of developing guidance. And so if any of you are familiar with our digital asset practice aid, which is a digital PDF that we post on our website, it's updated a few times a year based on either new topics or adjustments to existing topics. We're going to be taking that approach with AI. And so probably in the first quarter of 2026, hopefully, we'll be publishing our first draft or first iteration, I should say, of our AI practice aid, covering topics such as client acceptance, some of, what does a auditor need to consider as they are having conversations with their clients, and whether they need to, and what kind of questions should they ask, what should be those inquiries related to their clients' use of AI in the financial statement preparation process. We're also going to be touching on risk assessment and understanding the use of AI and how it's impacting internal controls over financial reporting. So that is one piece of guidance that we will be issuing next year. We're also looking at guidance for SOC engagements. So obviously a lot of service organizations are implementing AI throughout their services, and so how is the AI within the service organization impacting the engagements for SOC 1 and SOC 2? And we're going to be putting out some technical Q&As, hopefully either by the end of December or early January, addressing those engagements. So for the service auditor performing those engagements, how is AI impacting the systems? So I just wanted to let you know of that upcoming guidance.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll pause to see if there are any closing remarks before we adjourn for lunch, but it's certainly been a wonderful discussion, and we have so much to take away to think about. I appreciate all the input. Danny, do you see any other hands?
I do not, Barb.
Okay, well, we're close to where we had hoped to stop. We will see you back again at 1:45. Is that correct, Danny?
That is correct.
And you're welcome to stay in the meeting, but if you do, please turn your camera off and make sure that you're on mute.